You're listening to Penguin Classics On Air.
This program is brought to you by Penguin Books, publisher of The Sartorialist. Based on the popular website of the same name, this elegant, full-color photographic journey around the globe proves that ordinary people have the freedom and creative power to inspire high fashion. The Sartorialist, now available from Penguin Books.
Welcome back to Penguin Classics On Air. Every good book begins with a good first page. Now Penguin Classics is happy to bring you First Pages with Stephen Morrison, Penguin's editor-in-chief and associate publisher. The first novel by Nobel laureate Selma Lagerlöfs, who is, incidentally, also the first woman to win the Nobel Prize for Literature. The Saga of Gosta Berling was titled to pay homage to the Icelandic sagas. Its film adaptation, released in 1924, also launched Greta Garbo to stardom. This story of a defrocked minister who finds himself a ward of the majoress and her home for wayward eccentrics. The Saga of Gosta Berling is featured on this episode's installment of First Pages.
At long last the minister stood in the pulpit. The congregation raised their heads. So there he was after all. The service would not be canceled this Sunday, as it had been the previous Sunday, and many Sundays before that. The minister was young, tall, slender, and radiantly handsome. If you had set a helmet on his head and hung a sword and breastplate on him, you could have chiseled him in marble and named the image after the most beautiful of the Athenians. The minister had the deep eyes of a poet and the firm, rounded chin of a general. Everything about him was lovely, fine, expressive, glowing through and through with genius and spiritual life. The people in the church felt strangely subdued seeing him like that. They were more accustomed to seeing him stagger out of the inn in the company of merry companions, such as Beerenkreutz, the colonel with the ample white mustaches, and the strong Captain Christian Berg. He had been drinking so excessively that he had not been able to perform his duties for several weeks, and the congregation had been compelled to complain about him, first to his dean and then to the bishop and the consistory. Now the bishop had come to the parish to conduct an inquiry. He was sitting in the chancel, with a gold cross on his chest, with clergymen from Karlstad and ministers from the neighboring parishes seated around him. There was no doubt that the minister's conduct had exceeded the bounds of what was permitted. At that time, in the 1820s, there was a certain degree of indulgence in matters of drinking, but this man had neglected his office for the sake of drinking, and now he would lose it. He stood in the pulpit waiting, while the last verse of the pulpit hymn was being sung. A sense of certainty came over him as he was standing there, that he had nothing but enemies in the church, enemies in every pew, among the gentry in the balcony, among the farmers down in the church, enemies among the confirmands in the chancel, nothing but enemies. An enemy was pumping the organ, an enemy played it. He had enemies in the church warden's pew. Everyone hated him, everyone, from the little children who were carried into the church up to the church sexton, a formal and arthritic soldier who had been at the Battle of Leipzig. The minister would have liked to fall down on his knees and beg them for mercy. But the very next moment a dull anger came over him. He remembered well what he had been like a year ago, when he ascended this pulpit for the first time. He was an irreproachable man at that time, and now he was standing there, looking down at the man with the gold cross around his neck who had come there to judge him. While he read the introduction, wave after wave of blood rushed up to his face. This was anger. Yes, it was true that he'd been drunk, but who had the right to accuse him on that account? Had anyone seen the parsonage where he had to live? The spruce forest was dark and gloomy, and grew right up to the windows. Water dripped down through the black ceiling, along the damp, moldy walls. Wasn't liquor a necessity to keep your courage up when rain or drifting snow swept in through cracked window panes, when the poorly tended earth wouldn't yield bread enough to keep hunger at bay? His next thought was that he was precisely the kind of minister that they deserved. They drank, all of them. Why should he alone restrain himself? The man who buried his wife got drunk at the funeral reception. The father who had christened his child had a drinking bout afterwards. The churchgoers drank on the way home from church. Most of them were drunk by the time they arrived home. It served them right to have a drunken minister.
Thank you for listening to Penguin Classics On Air. All of the books mentioned on the show are available wherever books are sold. Visit us again for more programs on great classic books.